Marcus stood at the edge of the village market, watching the other young men laugh and boast about their latest hunts. At 25, he had never been invited to join their groups. His clothes were patched and worn. His boots had holes that let in the cold morning dew, and his hunting bow was made from cheap wood that his father had carved years ago. The village of Oakenford was small, with only 300 people living within its wooden walls. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and everyone knew that Marcus was the village failure. While other men his age had married pretty girls and started families, Marcus lived alone in a tiny cabin on the outskirts of town. His parents had died when he was 16, leaving him nothing but debts and a reputation for bad luck. "Look, there's the unlucky hunter," whispered Sarah, one of the village girls, to her friends as they walked past the market stall where Marcus was trying to sell the few rabbits he had caught. The girls giggled and hurried away, their colourful dresses swishing as they moved toward the centre of town where the successful hunters displayed their prizes. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with shame. He had been hunting since dawn, tramping through the thick forest that surrounded Oakenford, but had only managed to catch 3 small rabbits. Meanwhile, other hunters returned with deer, wild boar, and sometimes even bears. The village respected strength and success, and Marcus had neither. 3 copper coins for all of them," said old Henrik, the butcher, looking at Marcus's rabbits with disgust. "Skinny and small, hardly worth the trouble of skinning." Marcus knew the rabbits were worth at least 6 copper coins, but he needed the money desperately. His rent was due tomorrow, and he had nothing else to sell. He nodded silently and took the coins, feeling the weight of failure settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. As he walked home through the village streets, Marcus heard the excited chatter of people gathering near the town square. Curious despite his mood, he pushed through the crowd until he could see what was happening. A royal messenger stood on the wooden platform, unrolling a scroll with golden edges. "Hear this proclamation from His Majesty the King," the messenger shouted in a voice that carried across the entire square. "The Princess Valeria, daughter of the realm, seeks a husband worthy of her hand. She is known throughout the kingdom as the strongest warrior among all nobles, having defeated countless challengers in combat. Any man who believes himself worthy may present himself at the royal castle for the trial of strength." The crowd erupted in excited whispers. Princess Valeria was legendary even in their small village. Stories told of her incredible fighting skills, her beauty, and her fierce independence. She had refused dozens of marriage proposals from wealthy lords and powerful knights, claiming that no man had proven himself strong enough to be her equal. "The trial will consist of 3 challenges," the messenger continued. "First, a test of hunting prowess in the Darkwood Forest. Second, a contest of strength against the princess's chosen champions. Third, a battle of wits and strategy. The man who succeeds in all 3 challenges will win the princess's hand and become heir to half the kingdom." Marcus felt his heart race as he listened. Half the kingdom! He could barely imagine such wealth and power. But then reality crashed down on him like a cold wave. He was the village failure, the man no one respected. How could someone like him even dream of competing for the hand of the strongest princess in the land? Around him, the other young men of the village were already making plans. Thomas, the blacksmith's son, flexed his muscular arms and declared he would win easily. Robert, who had once killed a wolf with his bare hands, laughed confidently and said the princess would be impressed by his strength. Even young Peter, barely 18 but already taller than most grown men, talked excitedly about traveling to the capital city. "What about you, Marcus?" called out William, the village leader's son, his voice dripping with mockery. "Are you going to try for the princess's hand too?" The entire crowd turned to look at Marcus. Some people laughed openly, while others just shook their heads with pity. Marcus felt his face turn red with embarrassment, but something inside him sparked with defiance. All his life, people had told him he wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy of respect or love. Maybe they were right, but maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd's laughter. "What did you say?" William cupped his ear dramatically, pretending he couldn't hear. "I said yes," Marcus repeated, this time louder and clearer. "I'm going to compete for the princess's hand." The laughter that followed was loud and cruel. People pointed at his worn clothes, his shabby appearance, his thin frame. Some made jokes about how the princess would throw him out of the castle before he could even speak. Others suggested he would get lost trying to find the capital city, but Marcus stood his ground, his jaw set with determination he had never felt before. Something about the messenger's words had awakened a fire inside him. He was tired of being the village failure, tired of being alone, tired of accepting that he wasn't good enough for anything better. As the crowd dispersed, still chuckling about Marcus's foolish ambition, he walked slowly back to his cabin. The small wooden building looked even shabbier than usual, with its leaking roof and broken shutters. Inside, he sat on his rickety bed and stared at the 3 copper coins in his palm. 3 coins wouldn't even buy him a decent meal, let alone the supplies he would need for such a journey. The capital city was 2 weeks' travel away, and he would need food, better weapons, and decent clothes if he had any hope of being allowed into the royal castle. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter anymore. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had a goal that felt bigger than just surviving another day. The princess might be the strongest warrior in the kingdom, but she was also a person who valued strength and skill over wealth and titles. Maybe, just maybe, she would judge him by his actions, rather than his appearance. He spent the evening preparing for the journey. He sharpened his old hunting knife until it gleamed, practiced drawing his bow until his fingers moved automatically, and packed his few belongings into a leather satchel his mother had made years ago. As night fell, he sat by his small fire and thought about what lay ahead. The other men from his village would probably leave in grand processions, with fine horses and expensive equipment. They would arrive at the castle looking like proper suitors, confident in their strength and status. Marcus would arrive alone, on foot, looking like exactly what he was, a poor village hunter with more hope than sense. But as he fell asleep that night, Marcus smiled for the first time in months. Tomorrow, he would begin the most important journey of his life. He might fail spectacularly, but at least he would fail while trying for something extraordinary. And who knew? Maybe the princess who valued strength above all else would see something in the village outcast that no one else had ever bothered to look for. The morning sun found Marcus already walking down the dirt road that led away from Oakenford. He didn't look back at the village that had never wanted him. Ahead lay adventure, challenge, and the slim chance of winning the heart of the strongest woman in the kingdom. For a man who had been rejected by everyone his entire life, that slim chance felt like everything. Behind him, the village woke up slowly, most people having already forgotten about the strange proclamation and the foolish hunter who thought he could win a princess's heart. They would remember him soon enough, but not in the way any of them expected. As Marcus walked toward his destiny, he couldn't know that his greatest adventure was just beginning, or that the strength the princess valued most wasn't the kind that could be measured in muscle or measured in gold. He only knew that for the first time in his life he was walking towards something instead of running away from it. The road stretched out before him, leading toward the capital city where Princess Valeria waited to test the worthiness of her suitors. Marcus had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but he faced them with a heart full of hope and a determination that surprised even himself. The rejected village hunter was about to discover just how strong he really was. The capital city of Astoria was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Massive stone walls rose higher than the tallest trees in Oakenford's forest, and guards in shining armor stood at every gate. The streets were paved with smooth stones, and buildings stretched up toward the sky like giants made of brick and mortar. Thousands of people moved through the streets, more than Marcus had seen in his entire life combined. After 2 weeks of walking, his feet were covered in blisters, and his clothes were even more worn than when he had left home. The 3 copper coins were long gone, spent on stale bread and watery soup at roadside inns. For the past 4 days, he had survived on wild berries and stream water, sleeping under bridges and in abandoned barns. As he approached the royal castle, Marcus saw dozens of other men who had come to compete for the princess's hand. They rode magnificent horses, wore expensive armor, and carried weapons that gleamed like silver. Their servants followed behind, with wagons full of supplies and fine clothes. These were nobles, knights, and wealthy merchants' sons from across the kingdom. Marcus felt smaller and shabbier than ever as he joined the line of suitors waiting to register for the trials. The man in front of him was Sir Garrett, a famous knight whose armor alone probably cost more than Marcus's entire village made in a year. Behind him stood Lord Edmund, whose father owned 3 cities and whose muscles bulged beneath his silk shirt. "You there!" called the royal guard, pointing at Marcus. "Are you here to register for the trials, or are you looking for work in the kitchens?" The other suitors laughed, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn with familiar shame. But he had come too far to give up now. "I'm here to register for the trials," he said clearly. The guard looked him up and down with obvious disbelief. "Do you have the registration fee?" "It's 50 gold pieces to enter the competition." Marcus's heart. 50 gold pieces was more money than he had seen in his entire life. He watched as the wealthy suitors casually handed over leather pouches heavy with coins, chatting and joking as if 50 gold pieces meant nothing to them. "I don't have 50 gold pieces," Marcus admitted quietly. "Then you can't enter," the guard said dismissively. "Move along before I have you arrested for wasting the royal court's time." Marcus stood frozen, watching his dream crumble before his eyes. He had walked for 2 weeks, surviving on scraps and hope, only to be turned away at the castle gates. Around him, the wealthy suitors continued registering, some of them smirking at his obvious poverty. "Wait!" The voice was clear and strong, cutting through the noise of the crowd like a sword through silk. Everyone turned to see a young woman approaching the registration table. She was tall and athletic, with long dark hair braided with small silver bells that chimed softly as she walked. Her clothes were simple but well made, and she moved with the confident grace of a trained warrior. Most striking of all were her eyes, which were the deep green of forest shadows and seemed to see everything around her with sharp intelligence. "This man wishes to enter the trials?" she asked, nodding toward Marcus. "Yes, Your Highness," the guard replied, suddenly standing much straighter. "But he lacks the registration fee." Marcus's eyes widened as he realized he was looking at Princess Valeria herself. She was beautiful, but not in the delicate way of the village girls back home. Her beauty was like that of a drawn bow or a sharpened blade, powerful, purposeful, and slightly dangerous. "What is your name?" she asked Marcus directly. "Marcus, Your Highness," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. "Marcus of Oakenford." "And why do you wish to compete for my hand, Marcus of Oakenford?" The crowd fell silent, waiting for his answer. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, most of them expecting him to stammer and fail. But something in the princess's direct gaze gave him courage to speak truthfully. "Because I've been rejected by everyone my whole life," he said simply. "I've been told I'm not strong enough, not good enough, not worthy of respect or love, but I've survived everything that's been thrown at me, and I'm still standing. Maybe that kind of strength is worth something too." The princess studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. Then she turned to the guard. "Waive his registration fee. This man will compete." "But Your Highness," the guard protested, "the fee is required by royal law." "I am waiving it by royal decree," she said firmly. "Mark him down as registered." As the princess walked away, Marcus heard her silver bells chiming and felt as if his life had just changed completely. The other suitors stared at him with new interest, some with curiosity, others with jealousy. For the first time since leaving Oakenford, Marcus felt like maybe he belonged there. The first trial began at dawn the next morning. All 47 registered suitors gathered at the edge of the Darkwood Forest, the most dangerous hunting ground in the kingdom. Ancient trees stretched up toward the sky like cathedral pillars, their thick canopy blocking out most of the sunlight. Strange sounds echoed from the depths of the forest, and even the bravest men shifted nervously as they listened. Princess Valeria stood before them, now dressed in hunting leathers and carrying a bow that looked both deadly and beautiful. "The first trial is simple," she announced. "You will hunt alone in the Darkwood for 3 days. The man who brings back the most impressive kill will win this challenge. But beware, the Darkwood is home to creatures far more dangerous than the deer and rabbits you may be used to hunting. Some of you may not return at all." The wealthy suitors' confidence had faded somewhat at the mention of danger, but they still looked determined. They had expensive weapons, professional hunting gear, and years of training. Marcus looked down at his simple bow and worn hunting knife, feeling doubt creep back into his mind. "One more thing," the princess added, her eyes meeting Marcus's briefly. "The most impressive kill is not necessarily the largest. I will judge based on skill, cunning, and bravery, not just size." With that, the 47 men entered the forest and dispersed in different directions. Marcus chose a path that led deeper into the woods than most others seemed willing to go. He figured that if he couldn't compete with expensive equipment, he would have to compete with courage and determination. The Darkwood was unlike any forest Marcus had ever hunted in. The trees were so old and huge that walking between them felt like moving through a natural cathedral. Vines hung down like curtains, and strange flowers glowed with their own light in the eternal twilight beneath the canopy. Most unsettling of all were the sounds, distant roars, rustling in the bushes that seemed too large to be made by normal animals, and sometimes what sounded almost like whispers in languages he didn't recognize. On his first day, Marcus saw tracks that belonged to creatures he couldn't identify. Some were larger than any bear, others had too many toes, and a few seemed to have been made by something that walked sometimes on 2 legs and sometimes on 4. He also found areas where the trees had been clawed by something with talons the size of his hand. While tracking a deer on his second day, Marcus heard screaming from deeper in the forest. The sound was human and filled with terror. Without thinking, he ran toward the noise, his bow ready and his heart pounding. He found Sir Garrett, the wealthy knight, trapped at the bottom of a deep pit. Above him, circling the pit like vultures, were 3 creatures Marcus had only heard about in scary stories told around campfires. Shadow wolves were twice the size of normal wolves, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. They could move almost silently and were smart enough to hunt in coordinated packs. The 3 above Sir Garrett's pit were clearly planning to wait until he tired himself out trying to climb the steep sides, then drop down to finish him off. Marcus could have simply walked away. Sir Garrett had laughed at him during registration, calling him the beggar who thinks he's a prince. Leaving him to his fate would mean one less competitor and no risk to himself. But Marcus couldn't do it. The man was in mortal danger, and saving him was simply the right thing to do. Moving carefully and quietly, Marcus positioned himself in the trees above the pit. He had only 4 arrows, so each shot would have to count perfectly. The shadow wolves' thick fur and tough hide meant he would need to hit vital spots to bring them down quickly. His first arrow took the largest wolf through the eye just as it was about to leap down into the pit. The creature died instantly, its massive body crashing into the trees with a sound like thunder. The other 2 wolves spun around, searching for their attacker with glowing red eyes full of rage. Marcus's second arrow caught the second wolf in the throat as it leaped toward his tree. The creature fell hard, blood spraying across the forest floor. But the third wolf was too smart to charge blindly. It circled the area carefully, sniffing the air and listening for any sound that would reveal Marcus's location. For several minutes, hunter and beast played a deadly game of hide-and-seek. Marcus stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, while the shadow wolf searched methodically through the underbrush. He had 2 arrows left, and the creature was too far away for a certain kill shot. Finally, the wolf made a mistake. It paused directly beneath Marcus's tree to examine the scent trail, and in that moment, he struck. His third arrow drove deep into the wolf's back, piercing its heart. The creature howled once and collapsed. "Thank you," Sir Garrett called up from the pit, as Marcus helped him climb out with a rope made from vines. "You saved my life. I won't forget this." Marcus nodded, but his attention was already focused on the 3 dead shadow wolves. Their fur was beautiful and valuable, their size was impressive, and killing 3 of them single-handedly showed both skill and courage. But more than that, he realized he had discovered something important about himself during the fight. When faced with real danger, when someone's life depended on him, he hadn't hesitated or doubted. He had simply acted with calm, deadly efficiency. On the 3rd morning, Marcus returned to the forest edge carrying the pelts of all 3 shadow wolves. The other suitors had gathered with their own kills: deer, wild boar, a few bears, and 1 massive elk. Their kills were large and impressive, but Marcus noticed that many of the men looked shaken. Several suitors were missing entirely, having either fled the forest in fear or met some unfortunate end in its depths. When Princess Valeria saw the shadow wolf pelts, her eyes widened with genuine surprise. "You killed 3 shadow wolves?" she asked. "Yes, Your Highness," Marcus replied simply. "Alone?" "Yes, Your Highness." She examined the pelts carefully, noting the precise arrow wounds and the quality of the fur. Around them, the other suitors stared with new respect and not a little fear. Killing 1 shadow wolf was an impressive feat. Killing 3 was the stuff of legends. "Sir Garrett," the princess called to the knight, who was displaying a large deer he had managed to kill after Marcus rescued him. "Is there anything you would like to add about this man's hunt?" Sir Garrett looked at Marcus for a long moment, then stepped forward. "Your Highness, this man saved my life at great risk to his own. He fought 3 shadow wolves to protect a competitor who had mocked him. His skill is matched only by his honor." Princess Valeria nodded slowly, her green eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Marcus of Oakenford," she announced to the entire group, "you have won the first trial." The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain. The wealthy suitors clearly couldn't understand how a poor village hunter had outperformed them all. But Marcus barely heard the noise around him. He was watching the princess, seeing something in her expression that looked almost like recognition, as if she had discovered something she had been looking for, without realizing she was searching. The second trial would test pure physical strength, and Marcus knew it would be much harder for him to compete. But he had won the first challenge, and more importantly, he had proven to himself that he was capable of greatness when it mattered most. The rejected village hunter was becoming something new, something stronger, and he was just beginning to understand what that might mean. The second trial took place in the castle's great courtyard, where hundreds of spectators gathered to watch the tests of strength. Princess Valeria had chosen 3 challenges: lifting massive stone blocks, wrestling with trained palace guards, and climbing a 40-foot wall using only rope and determination. Marcus looked around at his remaining competitors.
After the Darkwood trial, only 32 men remained. Some had fled in terror, others had been injured, and a few had simply disappeared.
Those who stayed were either very brave or very foolish, and Marcus wasn't entirely sure which category he fell into. The stone lifting began at midday. Each suitor had to lift progressively heavier blocks, starting with weights that most strong men could manage and ending with stones that would challenge even legendary warriors. The crowds cheered as the wealthy knights and powerful lords displayed their strength, lifting enormous weights above their heads with triumphant roars. When Marcus's turn came, the spectators fell nearly silent. Word had spread about his victory in the Darkwood, but many still saw him as a poor outsider who had gotten lucky. His thin frame and worn clothes made him look weak compared to the muscular nobles who had lifted before him. The first few stones were manageable. Marcus had spent years chopping wood, hauling water, and doing the hard physical labor that kept him alive in his village cabin. His muscles were lean but strong, built through necessity rather than training. As the weights grew heavier, though, he began to struggle. Lord Edmund, the merchant's son with arms like tree trunks, was currently in the lead. He had lifted a stone block that weighed as much as a small horse, and he stood confidently to the side, already counting his victory. Several other wealthy suitors had also lifted impressive weights, their expensive training and rich diet showing clear advantages. When Marcus faced the heaviest stone he thought he could manage, something unexpected happened. As he bent down to grip the rough edges, he noticed Princess Valeria watching him intently from the royal viewing platform. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he saw something there that surprised him. Not pity or doubt, but genuine curiosity, as if she were wondering what he would do when truly tested. That look gave Marcus strength he didn't know he possessed. He'd lifted the stone, his muscles screaming in protest, and held it above his head for the required count of 10. It wasn't the heaviest weight lifted that day, but it was far more than anyone had expected from the skinny village hunter. The wrestling portion of the trial was even more challenging. Each suitor had to defeat 3 of the princess's chosen palace guards in single combat. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but elite warriors who had trained their entire lives in the arts of war. They were skilled, experienced, and had no intention of going easy on the princess's potential suitors. Marcus watched nervously as the other competitors faced their opponents. Sir Garrett, still grateful for Marcus's rescue in the forest, managed to defeat 2 guards before being overwhelmed by the third. Lord Edmund's brute strength allowed him to overpower all 3 guards, though he emerged bruised and bloodied. Several other suitors failed completely, unable to defeat even one of the skilled warriors. When Marcus entered the wrestling ring, facing his first opponent, he knew he couldn't win through strength alone. The guard was taller, heavier, and clearly more experienced in combat. But Marcus had learned something important during his years of surviving as the village outcast. Sometimes the key to winning wasn't being stronger than your opponent, but being smarter. The guard came at him with confidence, expecting to end the match quickly. But Marcus didn't try to match his strength directly. Instead, he used his quickness and the techniques he had developed while hunting, patience, timing, and the ability to turn an opponent's momentum against them. When the guard charged forward, Marcus stepped aside at the last second and used the man's own force to throw him off balance. When the warrior swung powerful punches, Marcus ducked and weaved, letting the big man tire himself out while looking for opportunities to strike back. It wasn't pretty or impressive to watch, but it was effective. After 15 minutes of careful fighting, Marcus managed to defeat his first opponent through persistence and cunning rather than raw power. The second guard was smarter and more patient, making the fight much harder. But Marcus had learned something about himself during the Shadow Wolf encounter. When truly challenged, he could find reserves of strength and determination he never knew existed. The second fight lasted nearly half an hour. Both men were exhausted, covered in sweat and breathing hard. But Marcus's experience surviving hardship gave him an advantage the well-fed palace guard lacked. He was used to pushing his body beyond its limits, used to continuing when everything hurt and hope seemed lost. In the end, that experience made the difference. The third guard was the most skilled of all, and Marcus knew he was in serious trouble from the first exchange of blows. This warrior was not only strong and fast, but also smart enough to adapt his strategy to counter Marcus's evasive tactics. For a while, it looked like the poor village hunter's amazing run was finally over. But then something happened that changed everything. As Marcus struggled against his superior opponent, he heard a voice from the crowd calling out encouragement. It was Sir Garrett, the knight he had saved in the forest. Then another voice joined in, and another. Some of the palace servants who had been watching began cheering for the underdog, impressed by his courage and determination. The encouragement gave Marcus new energy, but more than that, it gave him something he had never experienced before. The feeling that people were actually rooting for him to succeed. All his life, he had been the one everyone expected to fail. Now, for the first time, he had supporters who wanted him to win. With this new motivation, Marcus found strength he didn't know he possessed. He stopped trying to simply survive the fight and began actually trying to win it. His attacks became more aggressive, his movements more confident. After 20 minutes of intense combat, he managed to pin the third guard and claim victory in the wrestling trial. The crowd's cheers were deafening. Marcus looked up at the royal viewing platform and saw Princess Valeria watching him with an expression of genuine amazement. She had expected him to be eliminated in this trial, but instead he had proven that determination could triumph over superior training and equipment. The final trial was scheduled for the next day, a test of strategy and intelligence where each remaining suitor would have to solve a complex military problem presented by the princess herself. Only 12 men had survived all the previous challenges, and they represented the best combination of skill, strength, and courage from across the kingdom. That evening, as Marcus sat alone in the small room he had been given in the castle servants' quarters, he reflected on how much his life had changed. Just weeks ago, he had been the village failure, rejected and mocked by everyone who knew him. Now he was one of 12 men competing for the hand of the strongest princess in the kingdom. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he was shocked to see Princess Valeria herself standing in the corridor. She was no longer wearing her formal royal clothes or hunting gear, but a simple dress that made her look younger and somehow more approachable. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Marcus stepped aside, too surprised to speak. The princess entered his small room and looked around at his few possessions, his worn hunting gear, his patched clothes, and the 3 silver coins he had earned by selling one of the Shadow Wolf pelts. "I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow's trial," she said, turning to face him directly. "You've surprised everyone, including myself. When I waived your registration fee, I expected you to be eliminated in the first challenge. I thought it would be a harmless gesture to help someone who showed courage despite having no real chance of success." "Your Highness," Marcus began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Please, just listen," she continued. "I've watched you compete, and I've seen something that none of the other suitors possess. When Sir Garrett was in danger, you risked your life to save a man who had mocked you. When faced with opponents stronger than yourself, you found ways to win through intelligence and perseverance. You've shown that true strength isn't just about muscles or weapons or wealth." Marcus felt his heart racing as she spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow's trial will test the one thing that matters most to me in a potential husband," she replied. "The ability to lead, to make difficult decisions, to put the welfare of others above your own interests. The other men have proven they are strong and brave, but I need to know if any of them have the wisdom to help me rule a kingdom." She moved closer to him, her green eyes serious and intense. "I also want you to know that regardless of what happens tomorrow, you've already proven yourself to be a remarkable man. The village that rejected you was blind to your true worth." Before Marcus could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him gently on the cheek. "Good luck tomorrow, Marcus of Oakenford. May the best man win." After she left, Marcus sat on his bed for hours, staring at the place where she had been standing. The princess had seen something in him that he was only beginning to understand himself. Tomorrow would determine whether that something was enough to win her hand and change his life forever. The
The final trial began at dawn in the castle's war room, where maps covered every wall and model soldiers represented the kingdom's armies. Princess Valeria stood before the remaining 12 suitors, her expression grave and serious. "Gentlemen," she announced, "our kingdom faces invasion from the north. Enemy forces outnumber our own armies 3-1, and they have superior weapons and training. You have been appointed as military commander, and you must develop a strategy to defend our people and defeat this overwhelming threat. You have 2 hours to present your plans." The challenge was more complex than any of the physical trials. This wasn't about strength or courage, but about the ability to think strategically under pressure and make decisions that would affect thousands of lives. Marcus stared at the maps and troop positions, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility. Most of the other suitors immediately began developing conventional military strategies. They positioned troops for massive battles, planned direct assaults on enemy positions, and calculated acceptable casualty rates with the cold efficiency of professional soldiers. Their plans were technically sound but predictable, following established military doctrine. Marcus approached the problem differently. Instead of thinking like a trained knight or wealthy lord, he thought like someone who had spent his life as an outsider, someone who had succeeded through cunning and perseverance rather than superior resources. His plan was radical and risky. Instead of fighting the enemy army directly, he proposed using small groups of skilled hunters and scouts to disrupt their supply lines, poison their water sources, and attack their camps at night. He suggested evacuating civilians to protected mountain strongholds while conducting a guerrilla war that would make occupation impossible for the invaders. "It's not about winning glorious battles," Marcus explained when his turn came to present. "It's about making invasion so costly and difficult that the enemy decides to look for easier targets elsewhere. Our people's lives are more valuable than military glory." Several of the other suitors scoffed at his unconventional approach. Lord Edmund called it cowardly and dishonorable. Sir Garrett argued that such tactics were beneath the dignity of noble warriors, but Princess Valeria listened to every word with intense concentration, asking detailed questions about logistics and timing. When all 12 presentations were complete, the princess dismissed the suitors to await her decision. Marcus returned to his room, expecting to be eliminated. His plan had been too different, too radical for a princess who was herself a trained warrior from a noble family. 2 hours later, a royal messenger knocked on his door. "Marcus of Oakenford," the man announced formally, "Her Royal Highness Princess Valeria requests your presence in the throne room." Marcus's heart pounded as he walked through the castle corridors. Win or lose, this would be the end of his incredible journey. He had proven himself capable of far more than anyone had imagined, but proving himself worthy of a princess's hand was an entirely different matter. The throne room was filled with spectators, nobles, merchants, palace guards, and even some of the servants who had cheered for him during the wrestling trial. All 11 other suitors stood to one side, their faces showing various degrees of disappointment and resignation. Princess Valeria stood before the royal throne, wearing a crown that caught the light from dozens of candles and made her look every inch the powerful ruler she was destined to become. In her hands she held a scroll that contained her decision. After 3 trials testing hunting skill, physical strength, and strategic thinking, she announced to the assembled crowd, "I have chosen the man worthy to be my husband and partner in ruling this kingdom." The silence in the room was complete. Marcus felt as if everyone could hear his heart beating. "The man I choose has proven himself through actions rather than words, through character rather than wealth, and through wisdom rather than convention. He has shown courage in the face of danger, mercy toward his competitors, and the intelligence to value life over glory." Marcus closed his eyes, preparing for disappointment. "Marcus of Oakenford," the princess called out, her voice ringing clearly through the throne room. "Will you accept my hand in marriage?" The room erupted in surprised gasps and excited chatter. Marcus opened his eyes, certain he had misheard. But Princess Valeria was looking directly at him, her green eyes shining with something that looked very much like love. "Your Highness," he managed to say, his voice cracking with emotion, "I would be honored above all things to be your husband." As she placed the royal engagement ring on his finger, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had left Oakenford as the village failure, rejected by everyone who knew him. He was returning as the future king, chosen by the strongest princess in the kingdom. "You know," Princess Valeria whispered as the crowd cheered around them, "I've been waiting my whole life for someone who would value saving lives over winning glory. I think we're going to rule very well together. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the people back in Oakenford who had laughed at his dreams. They would be surprised to learn that their village outcast had won the heart of Princess Valeria through the very qualities they had mocked. His stubborn refusal to give up, his willingness to help others even at cost to himself, and his ability to find solutions when conventional wisdom failed. Sometimes being rejected by everyone just meant you were destined for something far greater than anyone could imagine. And sometimes the person who chooses you is the only one whose choice really matters.